So do you really need ND filters for your drone? Or can you get away with not using them sometimes and maybe using them other times? That's what I want to help you find out today and learn when you need ND filters and when you don't. Because there are times you don't, and there are times you definitely will want them. Hey, if you don't know me, my name is Jake and I create content here to help solo creators on the go. So I test and review lots of drones, cameras, lenses, places like this, give you tips and tutorials on how to use them. So if that's something that interests you, consider subscribing. Today I want to show you when you do need ND filters and when you don't. Full disclosure, Freewell did send these filters to me, but they're not paying for this video. They're not sponsoring this video in any other way, and they get no input into this video before it's launched. In fact, they don't even know I'm making this video. But I gotta say, I've always been a big fan of Freewell filters. I've purchased a lot of them myself, and they make a good quality product at a reasonable price. First, we need to talk about why we talk about ND filters so much. And the big thing is that you want to have a natural amount of motion blur in your shots. Now, there are times where you can break this rule, but for the most part, to mimic what our eye sees when you see something in fast motion, like if I'm shaking my hand like this, you want it to have a certain amount of blur. So if you hold your hand out and you shake it like this, you'll see your fingers sort of blur together as it's moving really fast. We want to emulate that with film and with video. The way we do that is whatever frame rate you shoot at, so if you're shooting at 24 frames a second or 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second, you want to double that and make that your shutter speed. So if you shoot at 24, you'd want 1/48 or 1/50 is where most cameras end up. Or if you're shooting at 30 frames a second, you want to shoot at 1/60 for a shutter speed. And if you shoot at 60 frames a second, you want it at 1/120. And doing that, doubling the frame rate that you shoot at with your shutter speed, gives you the right amount of motion blur for what our eyes and what our brains are used to seeing. That was settled on a standard a very long time ago because they realized that that's kind of where our brains end up and what looks natural to us. Not to say that you can't get away without it, but if you do, it looks odd. Everything looks a little stuttery and a little jittery and just a little bit strange because we're used to seeing that motion blur. So what we're trying to do is emulate what our eyes see, how our brains interpret motion as we're seeing things in fast motion. To mimic that natural amount of motion blur, that's where ND filters come in, because most drones, even the Mavic 3, has a limited amount of aperture, and even a good camera has a limited amount of aperture that you can close down and lessen the amount of light coming into the sensor. So the way we do that, especially on drones, and especially on drones without an aperture, is to use an ND filter, because an ND filter acts like sunglasses, because holy crap is it bright out here with the sun out and without sunglasses on. But basically, if you can see this here, it darkens everything around it. It's not that you can't see through it, you can, but it definitely darkens it. And so we want an ND filter to be able to lower our shutter speed and to keep our shutter speed where we need to be at 2 times whatever our frame rate is. That's where ND filters come in. And that's why I love variable ND filters, because it gives you a fair amount of leeway without having to change filters out quite a bit. But like this set from Freewell comes with an ND4, ND8, ND16, ND32, ND64, and then some massive like ND1000, ND2000 for long exposure photography and stuff. That between an ND4 and an ND32 is kind of the minimum of what you want. An ND64 is really nice if you're in places like this where the sun is insanely bright and you've got white snow everywhere and all that light is bouncing back into the filter or into the sensor. ND64 is good. But for today, we've been using mostly an ND32 to get away with what we need to. But there are times when you can get away without it. First, this is when you cannot. You really need to follow the 180-degree shutter rule when you're filming anything in fast motion. As you can see here, these shots, as I'm chasing myself or tracking myself or my dad on the snow machine, we're moving along pretty fast. We're moving at a good clip, about 20 miles an hour, and you want everything to look natural and motion blur. It does a couple of different things. One, it makes things look natural to your eye, and it also helps to separate your subject from the surrounding area, because everything moving has a little bit of blur to it, and your subject remains nice and sharp, as you can see here in this frame when I pause it. So when you're filming anything that has fast motion, fast action, cars, people running, anything like that, it's really important to have the proper amount of shutter speed for the frame rate you're shooting, because it gives it what looks like a natural look to our eyes and to our brains, as I explained earlier. But there are times when you can break this rule, and that's what I want to show you next. So one of the times that you can break the 180-degree shutter rule, where there's a couple of different times. One is if you're moving really slow and the stuff that you're filming doesn't have a lot of fast action to it. So for example, me setting up out here in the middle of nowhere, and I've got just a really nice orbit going on with the drone at a really slow speed. Here, you're not really going to notice a difference if it has proper shutter speed or not proper shutter speed, because the motion, the movement of the drone is so slow and everything around it is moving so slow. It's not as critical to make sure you're hitting that 180-degree shutter rule. But here, as you can see, as we pick up the speed, it becomes more and more important the faster you go to have that proper shutter speed compared to the frame rate you're filming. So like this, proper shutter speed, pause it here, you can see that everything looks blurry, everything that's moving fast looks blurry. Whereas this, improper shutter speed, as soon as we pause it here, everything looks sharp and like individual pictures. And that's what gives you that jittery sort of odd feeling, because your brain is trying to go, well, there should be motion blur. Everything should look a little blurry as it's moving around, but it doesn't. So something looks off. But there are other times when you can, record without worrying about shutter speed. And the biggest time is like, if you're just going out to have fun, film stuff, film your friends and family out on the beach, or maybe in the frozen wilderness, and all you're going to do is post that on social media, you want to share that adventure with friends and family, don't worry about the shutter speed. Just put the drone in auto and film. Capture the moment. That's really what's important at that time. But if you're going to do work for clients, people who are paying you to do work, people who demand a certain level of work, like TV shows or anything like that, it's much more important that you pay close attention to that shutter speed, the 180-degree rule, because they will notice when it's not right. Now, there are some other times where you can break that rule a little bit, and that's when you're going to do some motion tracking, or you're going to do some post work with like VFX. Then they typically actually want you to shoot at a much higher shutter angle, like a 90-degree shutter rule or higher, because they want to be able to track everything in there. And the more blurry stuff gets, the harder it is for them to track. So when you're involved with filming a shot for VFX or filming a shot for motion tracking something later into that particular location, it's really important that you know that ahead of time. So communication is great, so that you can set your shutter speed accordingly. And typically when I'm doing that, like if I'm filming, say, at 30 frames a second, I'll set my shutter speed at maybe 1/120 or maybe 1/180 or something like that, to make sure I get just a little bit sharper frame. Every frame looks a little sharper, and the computer software for tracking, for the VFX, whatever they're going to be doing, has a much easier time. And then they can add motion blur after they're done putting in the visual effects that they want to put in. But that's the only other time when you're doing professional work that you may want to break the 180-degree shutter rule. Now, if you want to learn other ways you can improve your drone videography and photography, click or tap right there. I put together a small playlist. I'll see you in one of those videos. As always, if you have questions, ask me in the comments below, or join my live stream Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern, when I'm generally not out in a location like this freezing my butt off. So I'll see you again soon in the next video. Cheers.